I'm holding a DVD. The title? Why Israel? And indeed, what a question. Why Israel? Here to talk with me about that today is the man behind the DVD set, and it's Dr. Tom Hughes. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Gary. Great to see you. Oh, wonderful to be here with you again.
You know, why Israel? That is the question you ask, and this is a 5 DVD set devoted. Really, it asks 5 questions, which I find interesting. Does Israel matter to God? What's the cost of being God's chosen people? Jerusalem. What about Jerusalem and Zion? What about the time when the world is against Israel? What's the future of Israel? Really good questions. And by the way, the most important questions on planet Earth.
Yeah, I look at this because when you look at the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, we go all the way back to the Bible, way back to the book of Genesis, when God established the Jewish people, his relationship with them and the covenant that he made and the land that he gave them. So you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. God is calling Abram out of his people, out of the land of the Chaldeans. He's calling them out, and he calls them to a new land. And he says in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, I will make you a great nation. I will bless those who bless thee. I will curse those who curse thee. And then you follow the book of Genesis through chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Just follow it right on through. We start to see the forming of a nation and the history of the Jewish people, and God setting his covenant and setting his boundaries and letting the world know, this is a people that I have chosen, and I've chosen to give them this particular land too. And when you look at, you go forward with Abram, and Abram has this issue with his nephew Lot. We all know about Abram and Lot, and their herdsmen couldn't be together. So Abram gives Lot the choice. Lot, what land do you want? Go wherever you go. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. You go north, I'll go south. Whatever you want. So Lot chose the place of Sodom and Gomorrah. And at that time, wow, it was a beautiful place that Lot had picked. Abraham's left with the leftovers. It's like, what am I going to get? And God lets Abraham know, listen, Abraham, this is how it's going to work. Lot may take that place that looks great right now, but guess what? Wherever you're looking, I am going to give you that land. And where your feet in the future are going to trod, that is the land that I am going to give you, to the north, the south, the east, and the west. And by the way, there's a lesson in this too for anybody. When you look at the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was a beautiful place, and Lot's thinking, I got the good deal. Well, that land ended up being judged by God. And sometimes we can look at this world and think, man, I can't let go of the things of this world. And God's saying, man, I got something better for you. Stop looking at that. This world is going to be judged.
Yeah, and I'd just like to interject that on my last trip to Israel, and by the way, I met you there, we went to Bethel, and we looked north, south, east, and west. You can really walk today in the same place that Abram walked and look north, south, east, and west, and you can see what God promised. And it's a staggering thought when you're actually standing on that ground and looking at those mountains.
It really is. We had the opportunity to go down there also on another trip I did after you had told me about it, and we were able to arrange it, and we did some filming there. And it's really remarkable to think that the possibility, we weren't sure exactly where Abraham was standing when God's talking to him, but the possibility is some of that very area, or definitely the general area where we were, Abraham was there, God saying, look, and I'm going to give you this. Where Abraham's actual feet were standing, I don't know the exact spot, but it is fantastic to just be in something like that and see that. So God makes this covenant with Abraham. Here's the promise. Here's what I'm going to do. And then God confirms the covenant with Abraham. Chapter 15, chapter 16, chapter 17. He makes the deal. He confirms it. He executes the agreement even while Abraham is asleep, we find out. God puts Abraham asleep. Abraham's asleep. God walks through the sacrifice that Abraham had, where he split the animals in two. And God is basically telling Abraham, here's the deal. This is my covenant with you. Typically, a covenant would be between both parties. But God puts Abraham to sleep when he confirms the covenant with animal sacrifice because God knew that Abraham and his descendants couldn't keep the covenant perfectly.
Right.
But God would, and God could because his name was on it, and it was a promise God made. But with that covenant, God said, here's the deal, Abraham. This covenant is for you and for your descendants forever. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the covenant is forever. How long is forever?
It's forever.
It's forever, and it's God's word. And then you fast forward from the covenant made to the time in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, where God says this. Here's the deal. If you keep my word, if you obey my word, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless your farms. I'm going to bless your families. I'm going to bless your bank accounts. For all practical purposes, I'm going to bless you. You keep my word. And you're going to have this beautiful land. You're going to dwell here. It's going to be wonderful if you're obedient. However, if you are disobedient to my word and you don't keep it, then this is what's going to happen. Cursed is going to be your farm. Cursed is going to be your family. In fact, this is what's going to happen. If you are not obedient to my word, I am going to scatter you to the four corners of the earth. And everywhere I scatter you, you will become a byword. Hence, when you look at the Jewish people in the history of the Jews, this is what happened. They did not perfectly keep God's word. God said, I'm going to scatter you, then you'll become a byword, and that's what's happened to them. Everywhere the Jewish people have gone, they become a byword. We've seen anti-Semitism. It has affected the Jewish people since the history of the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. Everywhere they've gone, there's been anti-Semitism.
That's right.
Yeah, and originally it was in relation to disobedience to his word, whether it be the time of the Babylonians or the time of the Assyrians, when foreign armies came in and captured them and took them and scattered them, or when you come to the Roman Empire and they just destroyed them and they were the great diaspora, dispersed to the four corners of the earth.
You know, it's a supernatural hatred. It's not a natural hatred that the Jews have faced all these years. That it comes from someplace else.
Yeah, it is demonically inspired.
Yes.
And I believe we can even know why if we look at the Bible. God didn't just choose the Jewish people to give them the land. He also chose the Jewish people because the Messiah was going to come through them. Hence, when the Messiah was born, Jesus came the first time, there was the attempt. It was a demonic attempt to have all of the little baby boys 2 years old and under killed that were in the area of Bethlehem because Jesus was born. The Messiah was born. It didn't work. Mary and Joseph had escaped to Egypt with Jesus, little baby Jesus child by then. So he had been taken from that. But it was an attempt to kill all of the Jewish baby boys so there wouldn't be a Jewish king. Didn't work. But since then, we can also surmise this, that Satan knows that the Bible tells us that the Lord is going to return. He's going to return to the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. He's going to return to the city of Jerusalem that the Jews will occupy, and the Lord is going to return, and he's going to rule and reign from Jerusalem. So we can easily surmise, just as Satan tried to eliminate the Jewish boys with the first coming of Christ, he knows that if he can eliminate the Jewish people, then he can make God a liar. He can prove that the Jews have been eliminated. God said they're not going to be eliminated from the face of this earth. And once they are back in the land, they will not be uprooted again. They're back the second time, and they won't be uprooted again. That's a promise from the book of Amos. So we have these things, but Satan wants to eliminate the Jewish people, so the Lord doesn't have the Jewish people to return to. He also wants to have Jerusalem. God says, I'm going to rule and reign from Jerusalem. Satan wants Jerusalem. Hence, we know also from 2 Thessalonians, there's going to be a temple that's going to be built in Jerusalem, and that Satan is going to be inspiring the world through the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is going to sit in that temple in Jerusalem and demand to be worshiped as God. But ultimately, it will not work. It is going to be his attempt, and during the tribulation period, the Antichrist is also going to attempt to kill all of the Jewish people. It's going to be a horrible Holocaust, not anything pleasant to talk about, but we see that it is coming, and we can tell it's coming because of what the Bible says.
And I'd like to take us back to the Holocaust for a moment and talk about the Jewish pogroms and talk about the Nazis and the Jewish reaction to it and the question on the mouths of many, many Jews in America during that time, Lord, why did you choose us?
Yeah.
Choose somebody else. But the Lord did choose them.
Yes.
Because they are his chosen people for a reason. Out of a long period of blight, there is going to come something really, really good. And that's the story, essentially.
It is. It is a great ending, and that is why you and I do ministry like this. We can look at the signs of the last days, and we can recognize that some of the signs are horrific. They're really, really bad things. But at the same time, they point to what is coming. The Lord is coming again. And you want to know what the Bible also says about the Jewish people. The Bible does tell us that Israel is going to be saved. So we can see how it's all going to unfold. We can look at the tribulation period, and in a nutshell, I can say it's for two things. It's to shake up the world and to wake up his people. He's going to wake up the Jewish people. We know this, that in the tribulation period, there are 144,000 Jewish men that are going to be saved, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Jacob, and they're going to be proclaiming the gospel throughout the world. I would liken it to 144,000 Apostle Pauls that are going to be, that I believe, Gary, are right now already being prepared for that. They're not believers in Yeshua yet, but they're going to become believers in Yeshua. They're going to know the word. They have certain righteous standards. God has them. He's already picked them, and they're going to be proclaiming the word. And many Jews, the greatest awakening to the Jewish people is going to happen during the tribulation period. In Romans chapter 11, I hear this a lot. You probably do too. That in churches today is where I hear this from. Is you shouldn't even be teaching the Old Testament. We don't need that Jewish stuff.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be talking about the second coming of Christ, and you certainly shouldn't be talking about the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, because God is done with the Jews and he's done with the nation of Israel. We hear that and they say only stick to the New Testament. So I say to the person who argues with me, a pastor who might say that, I say, you want to stick with the New Testament? Well, this is what the New Testament says. In Romans chapter 11, your challenge to me has been addressed, where God's done with the nation of Israel. In Romans chapter 11, the Apostle Paul writes and says, is God done with Israel? Certainly not. God has not cast away his people. And then Romans chapter 11, that New Testament book, goes on to say that the time of the Gentiles will be filled, and then all Israel will be saved. I say, well, what do you do with that? That's in the New Testament. God is not done with Israel. And you look, and the Jewish people were chosen, the land, and the Messiah would come from them. And there is anti-Semitism, which, by the way, has now turned into anti-Zionism, which the Bible also said is going to be another sign of the last days, not just anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism.
Zionism is racism, according to literally millions of people on earth today. They hate the concept, the very concept of Zionism.
They can't stand it.
And there's something about Zion I'd just like to throw in at this point in time. Once I was doing a Bible study, and I looked up the word Zion on my computer. And I have a computer program that allows me to scan the Bible and look at all sorts of things, the verses and the occurrence of words and so forth. And I looked up Zion, and I discovered that in the entire Bible, that word occurs 144 times. I thought, well, that's really interesting. Why 144 times the word Zion in the Bible? So I started looking, and I looked at the meaning of the word Zion, and as Zion in Hebrew, Zion, as they pronounce it, is the Jewish word for marker. Like you drive a stake in the ground, and that's the place right there. And guess where the place is? It's Mount Zion. right in the heart of Jerusalem. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is amazing.
Amen. I think of that with Zion, and so you're accused of being a racist if you're a Zionist.
Yeah.
So I am a Christian Zionist. I'm not a racist. What I recognize is the greatest Zionist of all was God. He said, Zion is mine, and I've given you the land of Zion. I've chosen you Jewish people for Zion. God is the greatest Zionist. And then he put it in the heart of people like Theodore Herzl to have a Jewish homeland established in the land of Zion for the Jewish people.
And we live in that time when Israel has been recalled to the land, declared a state, and we've seen 70 years pass since statehood. We've got to be in a prime time right now for something amazing to happen.
We must be. So we can look at 1948, Israel being established as a nation again. The Jews having Jerusalem in 1967.
Right.
And you look at that, and then the attempt to divide the land of Jerusalem that we're looking at right now. But you can go back further to the 1800s when the official Zionist movement began. So this has been going on for quite a while, which causes me to think, how much longer? I mean, you start looking at it, it can't possibly go on much longer. But you mentioned something a few minutes ago that I find a little bit of humor in. You talked about Jewish people saying, why couldn't you have chosen somebody else? My wife and I went and saw A Fiddler on the Roof at the Pantages Theater in Hollywood, California, not too long ago. And in that you have Tavia, the lead character, being the Jewish, suffering through the Russian pogroms. For all of our viewers who haven't seen it, you need to watch the movie, go to the play or something. Suffering through the Russian pogroms, they're in poverty, and his cow got sick or something like that. But he says, why couldn't you have just chosen somebody else? Because, throughout the play, in the movies, looking up to heaven and having these conversations with God. But it is, why couldn't you have chosen somebody else? The Jewish people have suffered, and the only way it makes any sense, it has to be spiritual, because they're such a tiny people in the sense of the number of them. And the nation of Israel is so tiny. When you look out on a map, surrounded by all the Muslim, the Arab territories around them, and you realize, well, wait a minute. Why is everybody saying that the Jews are occupying this land when you realize, well, wait a minute, they hardly have any land at all. And there's not like a billion Jews that are out there. There's not a lot of Jews out there. The only explanation is we live in a David and Goliath world. They live in a David and Goliath world. And it's been that way since their beginning, a small people against a giant who wants to eliminate them. And it's a spiritual giant.
And if you really look at the land that God promised Israel, it's somewhere around 1 million square miles. I'm not sure you can calculate the exact land grant, but it covers ground right now that goes all the way to the Euphrates River and all the way to the Egyptian River, as it's called in the Bible. And it's hundreds of thousands of square miles instead of the little tiny strip that Israel is living on right now.
They just have a little tiny strip. And this is another thing that's just bizarre. There's so much pressure from the world that says that the Jews have to go back to the pre-1967 borders. And then there will be peace. And then Hamas won't attack them anymore. And then they'll get along with their neighbors. No, the Jews lived in the pre-1967 borders, and their enemy tried to eliminate them. That is the problem, no matter what they do. When they gave back Gaza, I think it was 2004, 2005, the Gaza Strip, for a peace purpose. It didn't work then. I gave them back more land, it didn't work. Or you gave the control.
Land for peace.
And it's not going to work. But you want to know what? At the same time, this land for peace is going to happen in one form or another. Exactly how it works out, we're going to find out soon enough how all of these peace plans, whether it be the Trump peace plan or whatever it is, we're going to find out how all of these things fit together. I do know this, that according to the book of Isaiah, there's a scourge that is coming against the Jewish people in Israel. And to avoid the scourge, they enter into a covenant with Shul. At that particular time, when that covenant is agreed upon, that peace plan that's agreed upon to protect the Jewish people from the scourge that's coming against them. At that particular time, they have evil rulers in Jerusalem that are willing to enter into this covenant with the devil. We know from Daniel chapter 9 that this is a covenant that the Antichrist is going to be able to confirm. It appears there's already going to be a covenant for peace in place. The Antichrist is going to confirm it, and the Jewish people are going to suffer because of it. But the Lord is going to wake up the Jewish people through this process.
You know, you can count off the history of the world by referring to people like Moses, people like Abraham, people like David, and Solomon, and all of the prophets. You have Isaiah, Jeremiah, and you just move through history, and you can count off world history by the men of God from the nation Israel. It's literally God's time clock.
Yeah. As one friend of mine recently told me, he said, I look at Israel as being the thermometer on where we are and how hot, the hotter it's getting. And I said, that's a great way of looking at the thermometer. On a clock, we're down to the second clock, how much longer this thing is going down. So we took the nation of Israel specifically. Why is there so much anti-Semitism and why is there so much anti-Zionism? Because in Zechariah chapter 12, the whole world is going to turn against Israel.
Right.
So the last days anti-Semitism, the Jews being a byword throughout the rest of the world, as Deuteronomy 28 says, turns into anti-Zionism, where the Jews have no right to the land, and hence, that's Zechariah chapter 12. And hence, what do we have? We have the constant missile attacks against the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. The constant barrage of political attacks saying the Jews have no right to the land of Israel. Let's eliminate them. And again, it is a tiny sliver of land. And they are under the constant threat of missiles being fired and annihilation. Yet ultimately, they won't be annihilated.
And as you're talking, you know, I am looking up Zechariah, if I can do that and talk at the same time. And essentially, the verse I'm looking up is that the entire world is going to be summoned against Jerusalem. Yeah. And let me just read that because it says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about when they shall be in siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem." In siege. The whole world in siege against Israel. And, you know, you see that, right? You see all the precursors are there. There's something supernatural about this tiny nation of Israel that does not pertain to any other nation on the face of the earth. It's unique. Mm-hmm. The whole world literally is turned right now against Jerusalem, except for a very, very few people who have come to the aid of Jerusalem lately, and there are not many.
Yeah, I find that fascinating because right now we have currently we have the United States and presidential administration is pro-Israel. That's a real rare thing. But we watch what's coming up through our Congress in the United States. We watch this movement that is coming. It is more anti-Israel and anti-Jew than any we've ever had here before in America. And there's very few countries that are willing to support Israel, but there are still a few. But the whole world will be against Israel. And there's something else in this that fascinates me, Gary. Maybe I'm way out in left field on this, but Donald Trump recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moves the embassy to Jerusalem. Yeah, that's a big deal. It bothers a lot of people politically.
Well, it's a cup of trembling.
It's a cup of, Zechariah, it is a cup of trembling. And then he says, okay, we're going to recognize the Golan Heights as being Israeli territory.
Yeah.
Not Syrian territory, not occupied territory, but Israeli territory. Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 says that the battle is going to come on the mountains of Israel, not on the mountains of occupied territory of Golan Heights or Syrian territory of Golan Heights, the mountains of Israel. So I think this is interesting. In each one of these little things that Trump is doing, God is moving his chess pieces. And the world is getting more and more bothered as Israel and the Jewish people are this cup of trembling. And it's just remarkable. But the whole world is going to turn against Israel and anti-Zionism. And that's what we're watching happen.
And as you're talking, I'm having a thought here that I'm tempted to voice, and it is just this. It takes an unpopular man to do an unpopular thing. And I'm telling you, what he did in Israel, moving that embassy, is unpopular.
Oh yeah, it is. And I would even say what's happening, the resistance against him, again, it can only have a spiritual explanation. Because really, the Jewish people don't make any sense. And why does the world hate them? They're different. You can tell they're set apart. When you start looking at certain aspects regarding the Jewish character, they are set apart. Well, that's set apart by God. But you look at it and you realize just the whole nation of Israel, it is set apart for a specific purpose, set apart by God. God's anointing is on them and his hand is on them. Satan knows it. He hates it. He wants to eliminate the Jews, and he wants to be the one who's worshipped at Jerusalem. And so we can see everything going exactly the direction the Bible said it would.
You know, the fascinating thing is we're not talking politics here. And we mentioned the name of a politician and an action that he took. But we're really not talking about political things at all. We're talking about spiritual things. When we talk about Israel, there is a spiritual motivation at every juncture, and that affects the entire world. And it's been this way for thousands of years. And we're living, I think, in a remarkable time. 70 years down the line from Israeli statehood, we have to see something amazing in a very short time. I mean, you and I agree on that.
Oh, yeah. These are amazing days. And we live in days where we are watching the convergence of all the different signs of the Olivet Discourse. Yeah. And many of the other signs of the Old Testament tell us what to look for when Jesus comes again. All at a time when Israel is a nation again and the world hates Israel. Soon the whole world will be against Israel, but God is with them.
The DVD set, 5 DVDs entitled, Why Israel? You've heard just a tiny bit of what Tom Hughes has to say in full. And you can avail yourself of this right here at Prophecy Watchers just by ordering Israel in the End Times package. We have a 5 DVD set plus 3 bonus books. Wake the Bride by Jeff Kinley. And Jeff is, you've seen him here if you've watched us for very long, an amazing writer. You know him. Yeah. Jeff is a wonderful guy. And then Tim LaHaye, the late Tim LaHaye, the last time I heard him speak was at your church, 412 Church. I will never forget that night.
Was that when we did the birthday party for him that night? That was great.
It was wonderful. We had his birthday party, and I'll never forget Tim LaHaye. Look forward to seeing him again real soon.
Amen.
And we have a couple of Tim LaHaye's books here. A 5 DVD set, the 3 bonus books, yours for a gift of $49.95, free shipping anywhere in the United States. And by the way, we're going to have a cruise.
We're going on a cruise. It is going to be a Caribbean cruise. Jeff Kinley will be on it. I'll be on there. Also, Dr. David Reagan will be there, Billy Crone, Don Perkins. It's going to be a prophecy cruise, and I don't think that's all it's going to be there, but it's going to be cool. There's going to be opportunities to sit down one-on-one with people that are speaking too.
It's going to be phenomenal. And again, September 6th through 11th, and you can find out more about it at prophecyatsea.com. Thanks for being with us today. You've heard just a little bit of what Tom Hughes has to say. He is absolutely loaded with prophetic information. I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, you keep watching. We are.